Hello everyone, whoever's watching across Australia and New Zealand. We hope that you're feeling safe, well and comfortable. This is the annual Coordinator Network Day. My name's Tim Ross and I'm the Professional Standards Manager of the Lutheran Church of Australia and New Zealand. A bit of a different look and feel to Coordinator Network Day this year, and our ministries and our lives are looking quite different at the moment. As I said, I hope you're feeling safe and well, we have the assurance that our mighty God is with us, and we'll pray to him now. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the blessing that we can gather here today, gather in this way today with each other. We pray that you give us some focus, some wisdom. We pray that we can be productive, useful and respectful in discussing the issues that we need to discuss today. Please be with us throughout and watch over us. We pray this in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. We thank and praise our gracious Father for our First Nations people. We recognise our First Nations people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather. We respect the importance of their connection to their land and the continuing importance of it to their cultural beliefs and traditions. We pay our respects to the elders, past, present and emerging. As you'd be aware, PSD do deal with some very difficult topics at times, and you may hear something today that's going to distress you. We want to urge you to do whatever you need to do to feel comfortable. If you need to step away, of course, please do that. Please make sure that you've got someone to talk to, whether that's a spouse, a family member, a trusted friend, a doctor or a counsellor, and you are always welcome to contact us as well. So this is purely an online event. We can't vouch for your internet connectivity at home, but if you do have other difficulties with connecting to this live stream, there is a number there that you can call for technical support. You could also email Holly Koning, who you should have received an email from yesterday. So we do want this still to be as interactive as possible. Please send your questions and your comments via online chat. Please open your question or comment by telling us your name and exactly where you're from, your ministry. Please share experiences. However, please do be a little bit careful there when you share experiences. Please be mindful of confidentiality, of privacy laws, and please always be respectful. This stream is being recorded and it will be put up on the church's website during the coming week. When Holly sent you that email yesterday, you should have received a feedback form. Please fill that in along the way and send it in to us. We always welcome feedback. Positive is always gratefully received, but also negative. We want to keep improving and always be reviewing what we're doing. So let's have a look at what we have in store for you today on our agenda. Please note these times are in Australian Eastern Daylight Time, so please adjust according to your time zone. We have a couple of guest speakers today, Marianne Carver and Emma Grates, and we'll be going around the grounds to districts and hearing from professional standards officers and coordinators in all districts of the church. We have a designated time to answer your questions at the end. So please, do remember to send those questions in and we'll do our best to answer as many of those as possible during that designated time. And we do intend to finish by 4:30 Australian Eastern Daylight Time at the absolute latest. To recap on the last calendar year for PSD, we had a really busy calendar year. We delivered 97 Safe Church Level 1 workshops to congregations and ministries. We couldn't quite make the 100, but still a pretty good score. There were 2,168 participants in those workshops. And pleased to report that of those who gave the workshop a rating, over 90% gave it a high rating, said it was mostly valuable and highly valuable. And also pleased to report that it was only a very small proportion that said that the workshop was of limited value. During last year, we did say farewell to our training coordinator, Marilyn Wall, who did some terrific work for us. She moved to another position in the church-wide office, that of a Reconciliation Action Plan Project Officer, a really important area of work for the church. So we thank Marilyn for all her hard work and wish her well in that new role that she has now. But one door closes and another opens, and we were able to put in place a partnership with Australian Lutheran College, and ALC is providing services to us in that space and helping us to make safe church training even better. And Emma Grace will be talking to us about that. Emma is the project lead in relation to ALC's work on our training. Please do remember that our workshops are only awareness raising, they're foundational, so when you get your certificate, please don't just put it up on the wall or put it in your drawer and then forget about everything you've learnt. That's not the intention. The intention is that conversations continue and that you build on what you've learnt during those workshops. Now, just on workshops still, I do have some sad news. Unfortunately, we are cancelling workshops up to the end of May because of the coronavirus. It's yes, very unfortunate, but we do feel it's the most responsible course of action. A blessing is that ALC is expecting to have training, level 1 training available online shortly, and Emma will be talking to that. Level 2 training continued throughout 2019 with webinars, with strong attendances online and positive feedback. And they do continue still through 2020. We do urge you, if you hear something in our training and you think about it later and you're confused, or if an issue has come up in your environment, please, you're always welcome to call your PSO for assistance. That conversation will be confidential, subject to reporting requirements, of course. Please do note, though, that not all PSOs are full-time, so if you can't get through to your PSO for that reason, you are welcome to contact me. What else has PSD been doing in the last year? We have been managing the onboarding process for the National Redress Scheme for people who have experienced institutional child sexual abuse. This has not been as simple an exercise as the media has made it out to be. It's actually quite a complex technical exercise with 1,355 Lutheran bodies active and defunct relevant in joining the scheme. So I am pleased to report, though, that last month we were finally accepted by the federal government into the National Redress Scheme, and we can now go about that work in acknowledging the wrongs of the past and supporting survivors who experienced abuse in our church. I do want to stress to you, although it's crucial that you report abuse or disturbing behaviours in our church to the authorities, to police and child protection authorities, and that's something that we go through in our training. We do also want you to get in touch with us and tell us about it as well. And these are the details. Any reports that you make will be dealt with confidentially as appropriate under the church's child protection procedure, and if a child is not involved, we will deal with it under church processes, again confidentially as appropriate. I do want to acknowledge that everyone is tired Pastors are tired, paid church leaders and lay workers are tired, volunteers especially are tired when it comes to the issues that the PSD deals with. There is some fatigue around this, especially around the issue of abuse of children. Please, we can't stop. Please don't stop your hard work. We're adjusting at the moment because of this virus, but we're not stopping. Your work is making a difference. And conversely, if you do stop, there will be a negative impact to the vulnerable in our midst. If we're going to stop something, let's stop denying that abuse of children and vulnerable has been a problem in our church and continues to be a problem, and that there is still work to do. So speaking of children, our first speaker, is Marianne Carver, the Child Protection Project Officer. If you attended Coordinated Network Day last year, whether in person or online, you will recall that Marianne spoke to us powerfully. And so backed by popular demand, and now with her feet well and truly under the desk with the Child Protection Project, we have Marianne to speak to us today. She's going to update us on the Child Protection Project, and her presentation is on child safety in our church. Take it away, Marianne.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Tim. And hello, everybody out there in Australia and New Zealand, somewhere in Cyberland. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Tim, and to all of you for allowing me to talk to you again today. It's a very, very important opportunity for me to give you a bit of a sense of how I think we're travelling and where we're up to with the Child Protection Project. But before I start to talk to you about that, I did also want to say thank you to you, to thank you for the work that you do. Tim just talked about how important it is that you remember that you do make a difference. And I really want to emphasise that and really want to say that we are very appreciative of the work that you do out there in congregations in relation to children and child safety. Without you, very little of this would be possible. And it's important that you remember that. I also wanted to say thank you because I don't know about you, but I have found it quite hard to focus on, for example, preparing this presentation, given the current climate and the current unprecedented situation that's facing us across the whole world in relation to the COVID-19 virus. So I guess I just wanted to say that I think it's probably not very healthy to focus all of our time on COVID-19. And for this afternoon, my greatest interest is that we focus on children for this afternoon in relation to child safety issues in the church. So thank you for that. I just also want to say I can't give you a full overview of the Child Protection Project. There are over 100 action areas that we've identified in the Child Protection Project. I can't talk to you about all of those today. I'm really going to do two things. One is to try and give you a bit of a sense of the key messages. Three things actually. Two is to give you a bit of a sense of some new things that have developed in the past few months. But three, and most importantly, is to re-ground you. If you remember, last time I spoke to you a year ago, I tried really hard to remind you about why you do your jobs. And that's part of my purpose today, but a very, very important one. So the first thing I want to do is ask you a question. The only problem is there's none of you in the room. But I'd like you to have a little think about this quote. A person's a person, no matter how small. I wonder if any of you know who actually wrote that. So I'm going to pause so you can all think about it for a little moment. Perhaps this might help to remind you. How many of you remember The Cat in the Hat? I certainly grew up with The Cat in the Hat. The Cat in the Hat was written by Dr. Seuss. How many of you, for example, might know what Dr. Seuss's real name was? I had no idea until today or yesterday. Theodore Geisel, apparently, I think from the Netherlands, and he wrote The Cat in the Hat back in 1954. Now, I want you to think about Theodore, Dr. Seuss's words. A person's a person, no matter how small. That's what we talked about a year ago when I talked to you about children being real people with real feelings and real needs and genuine individuals in their own right, even very, very little ones. Like that. That little one is a person in her or his own right. She has the whole world at her feet, but she also has her own little personality, her own little needs, and her own little understandings about the world, albeit a very, very young version of all of that. And what about that one? This little fellow, or perhaps this little girl, has a quite an intriguing approach to the world already, I think. He or she is questioning what's happening around her or him. Quite a little character, I think. And these little darlings. A person's a person, no matter how small. Just remember that as we talk. That's why we're here. And these ones here too. Here's another quote. I wonder if you know who wrote this one. There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way it treats its children. I want you to think a bit about that. I think that really applies well to us in the Lutheran Church of Australia and New Zealand. How we treat our children is a reflection of our soul. Now, for those of you who might have thought about it, yes, it was Nelson Mandela, the great man. What about this one? If anyone causes any of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. I think you all know who wrote this one. It was, of course, Jesus Christ himself, or who said it, rather. When I was writing this and preparing this, my daughter asked me if that's what Jesus really said. And I said, well, yes, he did. And it's written in quite a number of different passages of the New Testament. And she said, wow, Mum, that's really intense. And if you think about it, it is intense. And it's intense for a reason. And I can tell you why. And that's because Jesus was a very good man. He was a very wise man. He was a great leader. But guess what else? He absolutely and utterly understood children. He understood their fragility. He understood their vulnerability. And he understood our responsibility to keep them safe. That's what that is telling us in Matthew 18:6. He knew it, and so do we. I often wonder to myself, what would Jesus think if he read the Royal Commission's report? I think he would be very cross, and I think he would be very, very sad. And that's a reminder for you about why we're here. We need to think about what we can do to keep children safe in our church. Jesus was also had a lot to say about children. If you read through some of the New Testament, he talked about things like one day, apparently, when his disciples were a bit grumpy about children trying to join in, he said something along the lines of, the kingdom of God belongs to people such as these. And that was in Matthew. He also said, as we would receive... No, he didn't say that, sorry. He also said he honoured children a lot. And he also said things like, if one wants to become truly great, one must become like a little child. So what does that tell us? It tells that he understood children and he understood the importance of childhood. When I spoke to you a year ago, I asked you to remember your childhoods. I wonder if you could do that again for me. I don't think you can do this job unless you remember children and you remember your childhood and you remember what it was like. You have to put yourself in the shoes of children if you're going to be able to do your job well. So was it a little bit like this? Or perhaps it was a bit like that? We all probably thought that our parents and our family were a bit goofy at times, so perhaps it was a little bit like that. Did you have a goofy younger brother in your family? I certainly did, to keep you entertained and to ruin family portraits. So remember children, remember about what it was like to be a child. And I spoke to you last time about things like being a child was wonderful, it was exciting, there were no responsibilities, it was so carefree, it was so much fun. Parents and adults made all the decisions for you and were helpful. It was wonderful, but it could also be quite scary. And I want you to remember that. And I'm sorry that I'm asking you to remember that, but I want you to remember that being a child was sometimes pretty tricky, or is sometimes pretty tricky. Children are fragile and they're vulnerable. They can't keep themselves safe. They need us to do that. In a church setting, given what we know that came out of the Royal Commission, they absolutely need you to be the key leaders in keeping them safe at church. I will join in with their parents and other key leaders in your church, but they need you. Part of your role is about keeping children safe. So remembering that sometimes being a child is really hard. Like, can you imagine at the moment, as a child in Australia, trying to understand what's happened in terms of the bushfire crisis we just had, how frightening that was for children who were living near fire zones, how frightening it was for children seeing their parents frightened and scared, and how they're feeling now in terms of COVID-19. Every single night on the television and in the news, and probably most of their parents' conversations, is about this virus that might kill everybody. That's really scary for children. So being a child isn't easy. And being an older child isn't easy, and being an adolescent isn't easy. So the other thing I wanted to remind you of is that we know childhood is difficult, we know being a child can be hard, and we know children rely on us to keep them safe. We also know the very sad reality is that children do get hurt, often, very sadly, by those who are supposed to care for and love them the most. Who wrote that? I don't know, because I forgot to write it down. So sometimes for children and for young adults and for teenagers, sometimes it's their parents who hurt them. Sometimes it's their parents who frighten them the most. And sometimes it's somebody at church. So when it's at church, we have a responsibility to care for all children and to see that no harm comes to them. How we treat children is a test of the genuineness of our faith. God calls us to make every effort to protect children and treat them with love, care and respect that is rightfully theirs. Who wrote that? If any of you are able to identify that comes from our Lutheran Church of Australia and New Zealand Child Protection Policy, you get 10 out of 10. Excellent job. So some children can be emotionally abused, we know that. I picked this photo because I want you to look at what's on his face, where it says stupid. A child who's been emotionally abused, that's how they feel. That's how they see the world. They see the world through the eyes of someone who's stupid or useless or hopeless or an idiot or in the way or not wanted, or a lot of other words that I won't use. Some children are horribly physically abused, and I'm sorry that these visuals are difficult to look at. I'm sorry about that. But that is the reality of our jobs, and your jobs out there as coordinators is to stop that sort of stuff happening, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse of children, either in their homes or sadly in the church or elsewhere. It's to either stop that happening or prevent it from happening in the first place if you have some concerns. You know all this stuff. I know you know this stuff very well, and I'm sorry about the photos. I just want to point out that little boy on the bottom right, those of you who live in Victoria may recognise him. His name is Daniel Valerio. He was 2.5 when he was murdered by his stepfather in 1990. His death, even now for me reading the accounts of his death, I get quite emotional. And reading any reports from the coroner's office is really hard. Daniel's death was so significant in Victoria, it led to Victoria implementing mandatory reporting laws in Australia. So that dear little boy is why we have mandatory reporting laws across most of the country. That photo was actually taken 2 weeks before he died, and look at that little darling, he has a smile on his face, despite what he was going through. So, what do we know about abuse in the church? Well, sadly, we know a lot about sexual abuse in the church because of the Royal Commission. Now, last year I gave you these statistics. I'm going to whip through them again because I just want to ground you and remind you that churches aren't necessarily safe places for children. You know that, I know that, everyone in this room knows that, but sometimes it's easy to lose sight of that when we're caught up in all of the day-to-day work. 8,000 people gave evidence to that Royal Commission. Of those, 60% of them said they were abused in a religious-based institution of some sort. A lot of those were churches. 90% of the perpetrators were male, 30% were people in religious ministry. That's priests, ministers, pastors, but also Christian brothers and a few nurses, a few, I've got COVID-19 on my brain, a few nuns. 25% were foster or residential care workers in orphanages, etc. 20% were teachers, which was a big surprise. 40% of the abuse occurred in out-of-home care type arrangements, and 32% of it occurred in schools, the vast majority of which were religious-based schools. It was a very, very small percentage of government schools. Now, I also went through these with you last year, but I want to remind you of why you're doing your jobs and why it's important that you're there. The common themes that came out, people didn't question the respect and the authority of the church. Power and positions in the church were utterly exploited by some people. There was universal disbelief that people in the church could actually sexually abuse children. And I think the best example of that is George Pell. He still has thousands and thousands of people who believe he is innocent, despite having got through 2 major court processes in Australia under enormous political and international scrutiny. There was really serious findings about internal cultures of secrecy and abuse. Lots of talk about churches being soft targets because we're unregulated places. Lots of talk. And problematic cultures of familiarity. I really want you to think about what I've just said. Cultures of familiarity. Our churches are unique because we're an organisation that is largely supported by people who are in volunteer type roles, but also people who know each other or who are related to each other. And sometimes we've known each other for 10, 20, 30 years, or 2, 3, 4 years. But the cultures of familiarity are fantastic in terms of building trust. They're fantastic in terms of developing friendships and feeling safe. They're also really dangerous in terms of us not believing that there could be somebody in our community who might hurt children. And that was a very big finding, particularly around churches. You know that perpetrators were moved on and protected within churches. As one of the major areas and ways that churches failed children. Children were not believed, they were absolutely blamed, and they were horribly discredited. And that was very, very damaging for them. Spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. Reports weren't made, nobody rang the police, nobody reported to child protection, etc. Nobody told the receiving institution or receiving church that they had concerns about somebody who'd been having sex with children when they sent a priest on to another church or a teacher on to another school. Institutional reputations and individual reputations were utterly prioritised. Conclusions were made that many churches were not safe places for children. There were serious findings made in relation to confession, that in some ways and sometimes and in lots of ways, particularly in the Catholic Church, that confession and absolution contributed to more abuse. Think about that. The concept of forgiveness. Forgiveness must be accompanied by some sort of responsibility and some sort of repentance, but the repentance, it's got to be meaningful and it's got to be actionable in some way. Other common themes, you know this probably just as well as I do. Children were traumatised well into their adulthood. 20, 30, 40 years later, people are still traumatised by what happened to them. Lost their childhoods, lost their innocence, relationships destroyed, lost families, lost their churches, lost their faith. Impacts were profound and lifelong. The other really big thing about churches, which you must understand, in fact, well, I know you understand, and I've talked about this a lot before, was the paradox of betrayed trust. The perpetrators of child sexual abuse in religious institutions were, in many cases, people that children and parents trusted the most and suspected the least. Think of George Pell. I think it's important to point out that institutional abuse is not just an historical issue. It's very much a contemporary concern. It's also a mistake to think that it won't occur in our church, because we know it does, and we know it has. It's also a mistake to think that it won't continue into the future for us as a church. Other things we know from the Royal Commission and that we've learnt from lots of research and readings is around issues of forgiveness and repentance and absolution. That's not enough to keep children safe. We know that, but we need your help in communicating that out there in your congregations. It's not enough to keep a child safe. It's a focus on a perpetrator, it's not a focus on children. Forgiveness and repentance will also not remove the harm to those who've been hurt. It doesn't take away the pain. With forgiveness must come repentance and responsibility. I've already said that. Without repentance, confession and absolution contribute to more abuse. Already said that. Things we also know from the Royal Commission and that I want to just remind you of is that the risk in churches is very, very high. And also here in the LCA and in New Zealand, we do have a history of child sexual abuse, albeit not at the same level as other denominations, but we do. We do have problems in relation to persons of concern coming into our congregations and how we manage that. It's also important to remember that recidivism rates for child sexual offenders are very, very high, and that we should always err on the side of caution when managing high risk. In Western, forget that bit, that shouldn't be there. Things we also know, I just want to remind you about your legal responsibilities. Churches owe a duty of care to all employees, volunteers, worshippers and visitors. And in that, of course, to children. This duty of care is higher for children and vulnerable people. Churches are required to take reasonable steps to protect children from foreseeable harm. Harm is absolutely foreseeable if a person of a concern, for example, is participating in church or worship. If these reasonable steps are not taken, the church will be in breach of its duty of care and could be liable. I know you know that, but it's important to keep reminding yourselves. Now, you'll see the national principles for child safe organisations, which I think probably by now you're reasonably familiar with. This is the other thing they also look like. I wanted to talk to you about those because they are already and will continue to be a major part of our work. If I was to then show you this slide, which is another version of the same, it's an old slide that Childwise put up. It's good. I like it because it works out well in a PowerPoint. The other aren't so good. So the national principles for child safe organisations, in terms of the LCA Child Protection Project, this is what is our guide. This is our roadmap. This is what we're working on. And the past 12 months, I have spent a lot of time working across those 10 areas alongside the Professional Standards Department, and a lot of time out there in congregations speaking to key people such as pastors and some of you, I think, and also visiting district church councils and Queensland's District Church Board and bishops, talking about these principles and talking up their importance. And during that time, we've become very aware that while these principles are fantastic, essentially what the Royal Commission and the National Human Rights Commission in Australia have said is if you do these 10 things, you'll have a child-safe organisation, which sounds very simple, but it's not quite so simple in practice, of course, we know that. But the difficulty for us, and a lot of feedback we got, was that these principles are written in a very secular way. They're also, they're written in very, very formal language. And they're also quite hard and a bit overwhelming. A lot of people have said to me, Marianne, there's too many steps, there's too much involved, how can we simplify them? So we've actually put a bit of work into that and a bit of thought into that, and we've made some changes to them, which I'll talk about in a little minute. But before I do, I just wanted to just have a little bit of a reflection about how we think we're going in the LCA in relation to these principles, the good and the not so good. If we were to look at the good, I think there's lots of good things. We've got fantastic policies and procedures. I do think they're very good, and I've said that for a long time. We do screening really well, and thank you to you for all the work you do in that. The training, I think, is really being well embraced, and it's good and solid. As Tim says, it's only foundational training, but it's good training at the level 1 level. We have a pretty good culture. People are prepared to embrace child safety, which is great. And I think people are pretty aware of what's happened in terms of the Royal Commission and that there are concerns. We've got the Professional Standards Department, which does some excellent work in relation to training, but also in terms of persons of concern, and also in terms of supporting you in the very important work that you do. We've got our standards of ethical behaviour, we've got Grow Ministries, and of course we've got the persons of concern stuff. But what's the not so good? This is the stuff you might not like. I think there are some things that we don't do very well. I've been in this job now for over a year. I hear a lot about, well, let me just change that a bit. I can't tell you that I hear a lot about people embracing child safety. What I hear a lot of are these sorts of questions. Do we really have a problem, Marianne? Does this really apply to us? Isn't it just the Catholics who have a problem? I hear a lot of people talking with quite a lot of resistance. I hear a lot of people not sharing any concerns about children not being safe in our congregations. I hear a lot of people saying we don't have any children anyway, so why is it a problem? I get a lot of pushback, and I know that the Professional Standards Department does too, when there are concerns about persons of concern in a congregation. And that's often in relation to things like it's often in relation to things like focusing on the person of concern and their needs, around their needs and their right. Surely that person has a right to continue to worship and attend church. What about this person's reputation? This is a witch hunt. He has a right to worship and a right to seek forgiveness. This policy around persons of concern and this whole focus around child safety is really all about punishing people who've done wrong, and whereas our church is much more about forgiving sin and offering God's grace. I hear a lot about the Word of God should be our only guide, and that sort of thing. I also hear a lot about focus on children not being as important as focusing on issues of forgiveness for people who have sinned. And I don't think that's the focus that we should have. I think we should be focusing on what we know has come out of the Royal Commission in terms of children's safety and in terms of churches not necessarily being safe places or always safe places for children. So, when I was talking to you about the child safe standards, the child safe principles are the Royal Commission's way of saying and telling us how we can create a child safe church. So we were a bit worried from a lot of the feedback that we had that we needed to do something different. So we've actually rewritten the child safe principles, the national principles, into some draft child safe standards for the LCA, specifically focusing on congregations. Now these standards are tailored to a faith-based context, the standards that we've written rather. They're much less secular than the national principles. They're tailored more to congregations. We've tried to write them in less complex language. We've tried to make them as straightforward as possible, particularly in terms of the indicators and action areas that sit underneath each of the standards. We're writing some easy to understand guidelines, and we're writing a simple self-assessment tool for you. And so the reason why we've done that is because we want them to be meaningful. We don't want them to be something that is either discarded or is viewed as just something that's all about compliance. So I'm not going to go into the child safe standards in a big way that we've written. I'm just going to tell you what they are, because they'll be coming to you very soon for consultation. GCB has approved their release to all of you for consultation across the LCA in Australia and New Zealand. What we would like you to do is to have a look at them, see what you think, and offer us some feedback about whether you think they're going to work. And offer us some feedback about what you think in terms of what could be written better, or what might be important in terms of the guidelines around it, or what the action areas might be best under each of them. We've mirrored them as much as possible to the national principles. We've had to find a balance between reflecting the national principles as well as we can, whilst also tailoring them as much as we can to our needs and to a faith-based church congregational context. So they'll come out soon. Just watch this space. We don't want to overlap or conflict with the current consultation process that's underway in relation to the Constitution, the LCA NZ Constitution. So we probably won't release the consultation paper until that consultation process finishes at the end of April. The consultation paper will contain a series of questions for you, so you can just answer those questions if you don't want to sort of talk too much in general terms. And we'll also include in there an LCA draft statement of commitment to children for you to have a look at and have a think about. And so as the Child Safe Church Safe coordinators here in the LCA NZ, you are critical people in this consultation process. Please bear in mind, our churches may soon be regulated across the country, in Australia that is, against these standards. So if they are, we will have to report on them in relation to each of our congregations across Australia. Already the ACT and New South Wales have indicated they are going to regulate against the principles. And we know, of course, in Victoria that they already regulate against their own principles, but soon they're going to transfer over to the national principles. So you are critical people in helping us helping us in our quest to try and meet these standards. So we've tried to rewrite them into as simple a way as possible. So the standards include things like standard 1 being our culture and leadership and governance is child safe. We've written a little spiel underneath each of the standards that tries to describe it in more of a congregational church-based context. and that's similar to, of course, Principle 1 of the principles. Standard 2, we've tried to simplify that to just say we value, respect and listen to children. And then we've written a little spiel underneath that. Bear in mind each of these standards will have little indicators sitting underneath that will be like steps or hints about and ideas about things you can do in your church to try and meet each one of these standards. Standard 3 we've simplified to say simply we include families, and then we've talked about how we do that. Standard 4 was a really difficult one. We respect and welcome diversity, which is talking about, as you remember, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, children with disabilities, and children from other ethnic and cultural groups, including children from refugee families, being much more vulnerable. So we're acknowledging that, and we're welcoming it, and we're accommodating it. Standard 5 we've translated into our people are safe, informed and supported. If you remember, of course, that standard was all about screening and working with children checks, etc. Standard 6 is about reporting and complaint systems, and we've said our reporting and complaint systems are child focused. And then we're going to have some simple steps that sit underneath that one. Standard 7, our congregation understands child safety. That's basically saying that thanks to all the excellent training that we do, our congregation gets it. They understand child safety, they understand child abuse, they understand risk, and they understand responsibility. Standard 8, our risk management has a child safety focus. That's a tricky one. We probably need a lot of help from you in the consultation process around how we can really help people get some good dot points sitting underneath that one. Standard 9 is about our policies and procedures, being child safe. And Standard 10 is just about regularly reviewing our child safe progress. So, what's your job in all of this? Before I finish, I just wanted to remind you of the difference between purpose and task. Some people divide this up in terms of talking about form versus function. Other people talk about purpose and role. I think it's easier to talk about purpose and task. They're very different things. You have a lot of important tasks in relation to things like chasing people up around training, chasing people up about whether they've got their working with children checks in place, and keeping SMO up to date, etc., etc. They're all tasks. They're very, very important, but they're not your purpose. Think about what your purpose is. I would say to you that your purpose is to keep children safe in church. And that's very different from filling in SMO. That's just one of the things you do in that process. But I want you to lift yourselves up and think big and remember that you play a critical role in keeping children safe in church and changing some of that culture that we're a little bit worried about, some of the pushback and some of the unhappiness and some of the concerns more about sinners and some of the concerns that are more about forgiveness of sin than they are around keeping children safe actually in a congregation. So just remember that. Your purpose is very different. And, sorry, I'm just flicking through my notes here. And so, yes, I don't want you to forget what your purpose is. I want you to keep reminding yourself about what your purpose is in terms of keeping children safe. I'm just going to flick through these ones because you know this stuff anyway and you can read it. This is more about really this is saying what does this mean for you? This is for you as coordinators, you have to do all these things. I've talked about them already anyway. It's about embracing child safety and not pushing back from it and viewing child safety as a positive thing in your church. So I wanted to finish by reminding you that you can make a difference because children cannot keep themselves safe in church. You are responsible for their safety. Their well-being must always be prioritised in everything you do, and whether any of this happens is up to you. You can make a difference, as Tim said, and you are also amongst the leaders in relation to child safety here in the Lutheran Church of Australia and New Zealand. So you, along with, say, your pastor and along with your church leadership team, you are the leaders. So don't view yourself as a small cog in the wheel. You are the critical people. We can't make it happen in your congregation, only you can. So whether children are safe or not in congregations, very much the responsibility is sitting on your shoulders. So I would say take it on and keep doing the very best that you can, because you are so important to our church. So thank you very much. So now, having finished my little segment, I would like to hand over to Tim Ross, who's going to talk to you a little bit about what's going to be happening from here. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Marianne. We are so blessed that you came to speak to us today, to speak to everyone, and so blessed to have you around in the office and to be able to tap into your child protection expertise. Next up, we're going to be going around the grounds to the districts of the church. We sent our man Dave Byer to speak to Deirdre Herman in the New South Wales district, the Chisholm congregation, the coordinator there. Our intrepid reporter in WA PSO, Bill Mensis, had a chat with Sharon Reid, the coordinator at St John's, Perth. But firstly, Dave spoke with Carolyn Kiss, New South Wales PSO.
We're actually both a professional standards officer and a coordinator. How does that work?
As the PSD side of it, I actually have very few coordinators in my district, but I do encourage all congregations to be using the processes that we have in place for planning and risk management for activities. Now, I have a lot of congregations that are quite small, and they would say, we haven't got the people to do this. We don't run these programs. We're really struggling. But my encouragement is still there, and for church councils to take responsibility for doing that and making those decisions. Some congregations actually send through their permission to proceed and their risk assessments to me to look over and then sign off on, and that's great. From my own perspective in my own congregation, there are not a lot of different ministry programs that are running, but when we have congregation-wide lunches and things like that, then they are being utilised into planning and processing. And we're also currently using a building that we're going to be moving out of at some stage. We will be worshipping and having any activities in some schoolrooms at our college before a new church facility is built. So we're in a time of change as well, but I want all of our activities to still have that planning process in place. So there's different things to take into account on both levels of things. In both New South Wales and the ACT, as far as being the professional standards officer goes, I work with the district office to know who has and does not have current working with children or working with vulnerable people checks, because the district office is the designated authority with both jurisdictions for verifying those checks. So it's a bit of a two-step process in both districts. So I don't have access to that, so I rely on congregations filling in their annual audits that they get from the district office to get that information, and that the information goes to the district office for verification. So mostly it works well. Occasionally we find a few glitches, but we're able to repair that as such.
I think you'll find that there are others that find just a few little glitches along the way as well.
Indeed. Not an occurrence that's just me only. So I'm thrilled that a couple of congregations fairly recently have appointed coordinators. They are still in the process of becoming having access to the coordinator level, so I'm just waiting for a bit of paperwork to come through from some. but I know that Deirdre, who's recently been appointed, has a great pile of work in front of her for putting in the information at her congregational level. So she's got a lot of work to do there. So I'm very grateful that she's taken that role on.
And we're going to hear from Deirdre in just a moment.
There's recently been some changes in both jurisdictions as far as clergy becoming mandated reporters. So that is an issue that I have worked together with the district bishop in him notifying all the pastors in the districts that that's their situation, because it's very much a bishop related topic in many ways. It creates some strong feelings for many pastors that they are now placed into that sort of a situation.
Okay, so what was the situation prior to the mandate there?
Well, certainly our encouragement has always been that if they would hear something, then we would know about it as well. But the clergy were not mandated reporters in either New South Wales or the ACT. So that came into effect in the ACT September last year, 2019, and on the 1st of March this year for New South Wales.
Anything else you want to share?
No, not really. I mean, I guess I'm a bit like the other colleagues where we're all, working together with congregations where we can be and encouraging them to be using the not just the risk assessments and permission to proceed processes, but also the application and screening processes. I think that's a really, really important highlight that we must make, particularly in the changed conditions post-Royal Commission, the 10 standards that we're going to have to work to meet, and that's certainly been a high priority for me to make over the years, and even more so now. Thank everybody for the role that they are undertaking in their congregations, and it's a big task when I suppose many activities of church are seen as not being trusted anymore. And so we have a big job ahead of us. So for the people that take on these roles, they're often in the front line of a bit of backfire from their congregational members of why they have to do all these things. So, I'm particularly thankful for them wherever they are, not just in my jurisdictions, but in all the districts across the LCA NZ for taking on the role.
Sort of problems or obstacles you've come across?
People don't want to fill in the paperwork, so I do emails and scanning the documents and talk it over with them face to face, and they say, I don't want to do OH&S, we know what we're doing. And I said, well, tell me what you're doing, and then write that down. That's my biggest problem, I think, is people say they don't want to do the paperwork and we're already doing it. I said, that's great, tell me what you're doing.
Any tips or hints for other SP3 coordinators?
Keep being open and friendly with people, being gentle with them, that they will have negative reactions, expect that, I think, and then work with what their concern is. Generally for us as Canberrans, we do a lot of this sort of thing in our work, and they don't want to do it when they come to church where they're relaxed and with their friends. So that's where I find the biggest thing. So having conversations with people about what it is they want to do with their program gets them motivated, and then I can say, well, I'll help you with the paperwork.
What are the rewarding or positive aspects of being an SP3 coordinator?
We've had a recent incident with these bushfires that came up the coast, the east coast of New South Wales, Bega and those places, and we had people from Melbourne not able to access the road south. So we set up they came through Canberra as their way of getting home. It's a long way around. So we set up an emergency evacuation centre, and by having all our SP3 in practice, we were able to put it up on a whiteboard as to what we were doing. And as each day went, I added, well, we've got extreme fire, heat, what do we do with that? Oh, we've got extreme smoke, what are we doing with that? And the SE3 people came in, SES, sorry, came in and backed us and said, we want you to be our centre for this emergency situation. So that was a really big pat on the back.
Good.
So
Fantastic.
the biggest outcome you could probably want is an emergency situation, and yeah, the local SES said, yeah, you're doing a good job.
Good on you. Congratulations.
Thank you, yeah.
In looking at SP3, how long have you been involved as an SP3 coordinator?
Started last year in October.
Okay. So this is still something relatively new for you.
Yes, yeah.
Are you well supported by your church council?
Yes, that's really important. It's called a ministry team, and our chairperson is 110%. She meets with me regularly and asks how I'm going and what do we need to do, how can I support you, and I have a great risk assessment person who is very skilled in his workplace and is happy to volunteer his time, and he really gets that part of it done for me, which takes my workload. And I think that's something that SP3 people need to be doing, is building your skills in your groups of those people that could step up and take leadership. So they're learning those skills as they go, and building it into those people that want to take more leadership, and you support those people and encourage them to do that bit of extra training.
Has anything come to mind that you want to share with any of the other guys?
To understand the value of SP3, why we need this system, and I think the Royal Commission, understanding their points, reading through those, that having a culture of safety, of respect, everyone has a right to join in and be part of the team, the congregation, what's happening, will be listened to. Then the people that don't want to follow that system have to deal with the culture of unity that the congregation presents. So that is the protective that I see that SP3 brings to our church-wide and our communities.
Have you got any tips for other coordinators that may assist them in their roles working with volunteers?
I've got a new coordinator coming online with this congregation, and I'll be the support person. And it's probably just take it slow. Don't expect to know and to remember everything immediately. Because she's, well, you know, well, what about this form and this form, and I can't do that. So, no, it's all right. You know, the main thing is to get permission notes from parents for youth outings. You know, if the elderly don't have a risk assessment form for their fortnightly lunch, it's not going to matter quite so much as, you know, we know what the risk is there. They can fall over and break a hip. But it's, yeah, perhaps don't be too gung-ho because you'll turn people off as well. It's just, yeah, be encouraging and just take it slowly and know that you're going to meet resistance because it's a lot of paperwork and everybody, it's all a volunteer thing for most people, and it's a lot that they're having to do for a volunteer role. You know, doing a full day level 1 workshop, that's a lot of commitment. So just, you know, be grateful that they're actually willing to do a workshop.
In your role as a coordinator, how have you found, has it been rewarding for you, or how have you felt as a coordinator?
I suppose it was a little bit different for me because this was just a role that was given to me as part of my job when I'd been in the job for about 6 months. Suddenly, oh, you're doing this as well. So it wasn't something that I had actually requested to do like other volunteers. But I suppose just knowing that we are doing our best to make the church a safe place, and that we can say with confidence that, you know, we're minimising the risks of abuse, whether it's physical or verbal or, you know, emotional, whatever. We're doing all that we can to minimise. It's not going to stop things from happening, obviously, but that's probably the big thing, and knowing that, yeah, the Lutheran Church is being proactive in this and not just waiting for, you know, royal commissions to happen and find somebody guilty and things like that. Yeah, you don't have to do it alone. I know I'm lucky. I've got 2 very supportive pastors, and one in particular who was my support coordinator before. So he's done all of the training as well. So he was able, if I had a question or, you know, sort of a little bit unsure about something, I could go to him and ask. But then you guys there in Adelaide as well, you've been really helpful. Usually it's just emails for me and to send an email off, but for the other coordinators to know that you're not there alone. There is, yeah, other coordinators in other congregations that you can get in touch with, and yeah, your PSOs once they're fully trained up. I've got a newbie. You've got support. So that's probably the main thing for the coordinators, because it can feel a little bit overwhelming at times. So yeah,
Yep.
know that there's others there to help you.
Sharon, in you're dealing with the SMO and your role as the coordinator, you've come across certain problems you've encountered along the way.
To me, the admin's actually not too bad now, because I took on this role when it was still all manual and the SMO wasn't up and running. So I was the one, and before the PSD department in Adelaide there, before you guys started entering things. So I actually entered every single detail for every single person that was on the system and needed to be on the system at that time. But yeah, maintaining it, if it'd be great, and like perhaps there is, but I just don't know about it. It'd be great if the system would give you a warning every now and then that, you know, you've got these 3 people are all there working with children checks are coming up for expiry. Unless you check this on a regular basis, you know, people can slip through the system and suddenly you find that their checks are expired or whatever. Yeah, so probably the administration side of things, because you are having to check on those things all of the time. And if somebody's only got a couple of hours a week to work on this, you know, that is, you know, can be rather overwhelming. Mind you, we've got a very large congregation here, so perhaps there's more work for me than what there is perhaps in a small country congregation where, you know, you might have half a dozen people doing 6 jobs each.
Thank you very much to our contributors there in the New South Wales and Western Australia districts. I'm sure you'll agree, some excellent insights there. Very, very useful. Thank you. It's now time for a break. You can stretch your legs, make a cup of tea. We'll take 15 minutes. So we'll be back at 2:53 Australian Eastern Daylight Time. Adjust the time accordingly for your time zone. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed your break. We're going to keep moving with our agenda. A couple of reminders firstly, though. Please do send in your questions. We're keen to hear your questions. Please put them on the online chat, and if you have questions for Marianne Carver after her presentation, she will be joining us for that question and answer time later on. Please, even if you don't have a question, please do sign into that chat. We'd like to see you there, and it's useful if you have to have that opportunity to have a question for us. Next on our agenda is Emma Grates, Director of Vocational Education and Training at Australian Lutheran College, or ALC. So Emma is very accomplished in the area of preparing, supervising, reviewing and delivering training. As I said, PSD has formed a partnership with ALC. We're excited about that partnership, and we're excited that Emma's here today to speak with us. Thank you, Emma.
Thanks, Tim. And it is a really exciting partnership that ALC is having with the Professional Standards Department. The partnership that we have, just to give you some ideas, is that we're not only supporting the Professional Standards Department with reviewing and looking at their current training material, but we're also looking at supporting all of the professional standards officers and also their casual trainers in what they are doing and how they're presenting, and giving them some professional development and support as they go along. So we're really excited about that partnership, and the fact that Professional Standards has come to ALC and looks to us as people who are able to provide quality training, and we're really excited about that. And again, Tim, on behalf of ALC, thank you so much for that invitation to do that. Part of what I'm going to do today is to actually share with you a little bit more about what we have been doing with the Professional Standards Department, how we've been updating some of their training, just to bring you as coordinators up to speed with that. You as coordinators are not looking to redo your level 1 training, but you will have people in your congregations or contexts that will be needing to do this training. And so we are wanting to give you some of the insights so that you understand what is available and what will be happening, so that when you maybe get some questions or people are wanting to know a bit more, you feel equipped along the way. So hopefully this time with me now will give you that as well. Some of you have also met me in the last couple of months as I've sat in on some of the professional standards training. That was in Victoria, South Australia and Queensland. And as time goes on, I'm looking forward to also sitting in on some of the trainings that will be happening into the future. As you'll see on your screen right now, the 4 main areas I want to chat with you today is about what we've updated in the level 1 training. That's the full day training that has been implemented over the last few years. We want to bring you up to speed on where the online training is now and what will be happening with that. And also the refresher training that many of you have heard about and will be happening fairly soon. And the last little bit, won't take very long at all, is just to update you on the level 2 training that many of you have completed over the years to become a team leader or coordinator, and just letting you know what that will be as part of the project as well. So for many of you, you would know that the level 1 training is in 3 parts. It's offered currently as a face-to-face workshop. To let you know, things are not changing in that space. It is still 3 parts. It is still the 3 parts that you can see currently on your screen. We are still supporting the Professional Standards Department to offer recognition of prior learning for both the first and the third sessions, as you can see up there. You will know, if you're a details person, you'll see that S2 is now called Introduction to Safety Management, not Introduction to SP3. Trying to have more of a broader approach to what safety management is, knowing that SP3 and the system behind it is an important part of that, but it's not the main focus of it. It is overall safety management that we can provide in our congregation's context. You'll also notice too that all the training will now be saying safe church training, and that's been part of a directive that's come down to change that to be a more holistic approach to the training, not just always professional standards training. So you'll see that language changed over time, and it'll be a very subtle change, but that's what it will be called going into the future. So to update you on the level 1 face-to-face training, pretty much 90% of what has been presented over the last 3 years is remaining the same. So if you completed a full face-to-face training in the last 3 years, do not feel like you have now missed out on anything important. You've still captured majority of what needs to be shared. But as you've heard today, especially from Marianne in her presentation, which was very insightful, and again, thank you, Marianne, for sharing all of that. But Marianne shared in depth about the 10 guiding principles that have come out from the Royal Commission recommendations. We've currently incorporated that now quite significantly into the level 1 training, mainly in S2 and S3 where they fit. And we've actually tried to help the participants who sit in that training to understand how each of those principles actually relate to what we are doing as a wide church, but also how individual congregations can incorporate that as well. So as they go through the training, they're not going principle 1 to principle 10. They start at principle 3 and then they jump to principle 4, down to principle 7, back to principle 1. It might sound a little disjointed, but it's actually done in a way that flows really nicely for the participants to understand how they are fitting in. Marianne did share, though, that there is church-wide consultation now to create these principles into a more contextual process for our church. So when that happens, we will also update that training to make sure that we're speaking the same language all the way through. A few other small things will be that you'll notice that the formatting and content has changed slightly. Even just right now, this screen, that what you can see on your computer is an example of just some of the updated formatting, making it a little bit easier to read and clearer to read, taking little bits of information that might have been shared in S3, jump into S2. These are small things that you probably wouldn't even notice if you had to redo the face-to-face training. And people who have done this, do this training for the first time won't even realise, but we know behind the scenes and we just wanted to share that with you. We've also made a few updates to the way that the person of concern policy has been put into place, and giving people who are doing the training more information about how that relates and what the processes are to implement that, and also grooming indicators as well. So just, again, Tim talked about awareness training. We're really trying to make sure that that awareness comes through in that face-to-face training. The professional standards officers and the trainers now have all of that new material to use. And as I just said, I've been going around and visiting the PSOs to see them utilising some of this training. Some have just finished off on what we would call a previous training version. A couple have started, and I know Dave here in South Australia has actually road tested that over the last month, and we're really excited on how that's been well received. So that's just to bring you up to date with what's been happening with that face-to-face training. Now, there's a slight ironicness in what we've just shared, is, as Tim mentioned right at the very start of today, that due to the current government regulations about distancing bans or laws, also about gatherings, is that the PSD has decided, Professional Standards Department has decided to suspend all face-to-face workshops for the foreseeable future, at least till the end of May, and then we'll start to look at how that can be rolled out. What that means is that we've been almost forced very quickly to now make sure that online training is now made available for people to be able to complete their training. So what would have originally been that face-to-face training was the preferred method, and online training would be offered as an alternative, especially for those who might be in remote locations or can't get to weekend workshops. This, in consultation with professional standards officers and the department, people would go and see if they can do the online training. What we've now had to say is that it's now become the desired option for the level 1 training at this point in time. So what we are doing is we're trying to steamroll this process a little bit quicker than what we had anticipated. And by the early part of April, you'll be notified that this is now available and as an option for all of level 1 people to do. Sorry, I'm just making sure I've got all my notes here. So the online training will be utilised through Australian Lutheran College's iLearn platform. There are quite a number of you who will probably say, oh, I've been in that platform before. If you are an employee of our church, you've maybe done congregational leadership training, HRS, human resources systems, or if you're in our education system, it's what Valuing Safe Communities through Lutheran Education Australia uses. So it's a very easy to use platform, easy to access, anyone can access it anywhere, and I'll explain a little bit further on how to engage with iLearn and what that looks like. Online, this training, the full face-to-face training, original training, level 1 training, is still divided into those individual sessions. So for those who need to do all 3, can still do all 3 sessions, or if you're someone who might only need to do S2 because of your recognition of prior learning, you can do just S2. Some people only need to do S1, and that's been in consultation with their PSOs. So we've set it up in a way that you'll be able to access each of those individual sessions as you need. For some people, you might be wondering, well, how does that go with registration? Well, we're planning to do the registration in exactly the same format. Registrations will happen through the LCA website, and you'll go through what's called the CVent system, put all your details in and register that way, as if you're actually doing a workshop. But then what will happen at the end of all of that is that you'll then get sent an email with how to log into iLearn and that system. Again, I'll explain that to you very shortly. At the end of a training, the same administration process will happen. Individuals will, their congregations or their organisations will be invoiced from the PSD department, and certificates will be issued from the department as well. So all of that remains exactly the same. Just the mode of delivery will now be online. The rest of it will still be handled by the Professional Standards Department. What we will be encouraging is that all participants, when they've registered, would have up to about a month to complete their online training. We're still going through some of the finer details at the moment in terms of how long that is. Is that 30 days? Is that a calendar month? All of those kind of things. Please don't worry about the small things just yet, because we're still working through the small stuff, but we want to be able to still encourage people to do their training as quickly as they can possibly do it, so that they're trained up for your ministries. But at the same time too, we don't want them sitting there for 3, 4, 5 months and not completing training. So we're going to work with each individual, but also just to let you know that will be potentially behind the scenes what we're hoping to do. So I'm just going to show you a couple of small things when it comes to iLearn, because some of you might like to just know what they might see, so that you're also familiar with that as well. So when people log on to iLearn through Australian Lutheran College's website or through the link that they'll be given in an email, this is the landing page. So straight away people should be able to quite easily see that it says iLearn, it's ALC. This is the front that they will see. There's no information straight up to say it's for professional standards, that's further through. But all of our students that do vet subjects at ALC and any of those other areas I mentioned before, like congregational leadership training, this is the space that they go through to be able to access iLearn. What we'll require is that everybody either logs in or creates a new account. And if they've never actually gone into iLearn before, they'll be asked to create a new account. And you can see here on your screen that there's a little arrow that points to create new account. And so they'll go on there, put in a few different details, put in a new password that they want to use, and then they'll have an email sent to them. They will then need to activate that email so that they can then come back into iLearn. Quite often, just due to technology, it goes to a spam or a junk mail box. So if you can just encourage people to go and check that. If they say to you, I registered, I tried to get an account and I haven't got my email yet, just subtly say, have you checked your junk mail box? Because ironically, if somebody rings us at ALC, the first thing we're going to ask them is, have you checked your junk mailbox? So just to let them know that that's the process. Once they've then activated their account, they jump back into our website, go back to the same screen and put in their username and password. Some of the other advantages that we have got is that the fact that ALC works so closely with the church-wide office, we have a reciprocal nature, which means that if you know that you have an LCA, Lutheran Church of Australia email address, which finishes with lca.org.au, and you quite often log into a portal with a password, that automatically gets you into iLearn. So you can use that, so use the current password you have with your LCA account. The other thing too is you can also use a previous account that you might have set up for one of those other areas I mentioned, like congregational leadership training. So we have this reciprocal, which actually makes it really quite a lovely little partnership that doesn't matter how many things you've been in iLearn with, you'll be able to utilise that and have it all collectively in one spot, which is really lovely. What we're going to be doing is providing codes. So when somebody registers, we'll be giving them unique codes depending on what sessions they're planning to attend or to do in the training, and also what district they're part of. What that will allow is that when they go into the system, they'll be grouped. They're still doing the same content as everybody else, but at the very end, all the different PSOs will have an opportunity to see what's happening with their district's participants. This allows them to be able to give the support that they need to individuals. It allows us for reporting mechanisms to be more streamlined. So each different district will get a different kind of set of codes, and if somebody needs to do 3 sessions, they'll actually end up having 3 different codes that they'll go into. So on the screen right now, what you can see is a box. Now I know it's quite faint on here and I apologise, but there's a little bit that says enrolment key. And what will happen is when someone logs into iLearn, you'll be able to follow a few prompts to get to Professional Standards Department, and that will then have this little spot that allows you to be able to click on and put in a code. Once you're in the code, that automatically registers you into the training, and you can just go straight on in and start your training process. Once you're in iLearn, you will then see this. This is the interface. Now, just FYI, again, if you're a details person, some of the headings will change slightly as it goes along. So just understand that it might not be called S1 Standards of Ethical Behaviour when you get in there. We might have to change it for some reason, but the concept is here. There's a multiple number of tabs. One's currently up called Personal Behaviour, and that's in gold. And you'll work through all of those tabs in a sequence. There'll be different activities that you get to do. So there'll be videos to watch, as you can see up here. There'll be questions to answer. There'll be parts of content to look at. There'll be small little activities throughout. The best part and a couple of the wonderful advantages of doing online learning is that people can come in and out of this at their own time. Everything will be saved up to where they are. If they complete an activity, it will be marked as complete. When they jump back in, they don't have to redo that activity. They just go from the next tab onwards. There will be a series of compulsory activities that will be done to ensure that we can see the progress for people going through the training. So after 1 or 2 tabs, there'll be a compulsory. You will not be able to access the following tabs until you've completed that activity. The other advantage of doing online training is people can spend as much time as they need in this space. Please note, doing online training does not mean it's going to go faster, or the time will be considerably different to what it would have been doing face-to-face. People need to still allocate up to a day, or the 5.5 hours, that the current face-to-face training is, to be able to complete what is online. So don't think this is a quick jump through and people will get through the system faster. If they are doing this in the way that it is designed, they will still need to allow that amount of time to complete it as well. And I just said this very briefly about the compulsory activities, but the compulsory activities serve like validation tasks for us, which means that by the end of it, we will know that they have completed the training, just like a face-to-face training, and they'll be able to tick off all their validation tasks, and then that will be sent through as a report. We'll be able to go and check that all of those have been completed, and then hopefully if everything's all been ticked off, they'll still receive their certificate as if they've just done a face-to-face. So that's about the online system. I'm not going to go into any more details about that unless you have some questions, and please feed that through into the chat box. But it's just to give you an idea of what it's going to look like, what those participants will experience. Of course, if you have people who are very uncertain about doing online training, please let them know to talk to their PSOs about waiting for the next sort of face-to-face trainings to come along. And we are starting to now, just in the advent of what's been happening around our world, looking at maybe even hosting a few webinars of the level 1, but there's no guarantee and there's no plans just yet. But just to let you know, we are looking at multiple different options on how we can continue to get people trained up in this current climate. Refresher training. There's been a lot of talk about, are we going to have refresher training? Well, the answer is yes, and it now coincides at exactly the same time as trying to get the face-to-face full training up online as well. So our hope and dream is by early April, we'll also have a refresher training up online. It's, as I just said, it's also available online, and eventually what we will also have is that will also be face-to-face as well. It will only be available for those who have previously completed all 3 level 1 sessions. So if you've only completed S1 or S2, it's not available for you. It's only if you've completed all 3 of those within the last 3 years. I'm going to always say, talk to your PSOs if you're uncertain about whether you or a participant needs to do refresher training, because they will be the people who will have plenty of information going forward as to who can and can't do refresher training. In the level 1 refresher training, it will also reflect all the updates that are from the level 1 full training as well. So things like the 10 guiding principles, any updated LCA policies will be incorporated into the refresher. So those of you who will do a refresher will hear about those in that new context as well. And just like the level 1 training, registration will be online through the LCA website, and iLearn access will be the same as well. So that will be available as an online training. So right now you can understand we're trying to put as much as we can into the online environment to allow you, especially while you've got maybe some extra time up your sleeve, to get some training out of the way and do it online in your own context and timeframes. The very last thing I just want to share with you is the Level 2 review. Level 2 training will continue exactly the way it has been going, with Dave Byer, Elizabeth Cloden doing the webinars. That's not going to change at this point in time, and we don't see that actually probably changing at all. We think that's a great system. We will just make sure the Level 2 material is just updated to be in line with anything that's been shared in Level 1 training. Level 2 will still also be for team leaders and coordinators, and Level 2 will still, as I just said, be offered through a webinar. So that's to bring you up to speed very quickly about the training. We're at ALC, we're open to hearing from you if you'd like to share any other things, but we at the moment probably encourage you to continue to talk through your PSOs or the Professional Standards Department if you have any questions about training in general. And we really look forward to being able to launch the online in a couple of weeks to be able to service all of our churches and departments. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Emma, and it's been excellent to collaborate with you and ALC. We're now going to go to part 2 of our Around the Districts segment. We'll be speaking to various people around the place. Denise Muschamp, PSO for the Victorian District, including Tasmania, as well as the Lutheran Church of New Zealand, spoke with Jennifer Goldsworthy of the Neale Parish. We'll hear a message from Elizabeth Cloden, PSO for the Queensland District, and also from Shane DeJager, the coordinator at Middle Park in the Queensland District. And Dave Byer, the South Australian Northern Territory PSO, is here with us in North Adelaide, and he had some contributions from Christine Dakey, the coordinator at Udunda. But first, let's hear from Denise.
Well, hello everyone. It's really lovely to be with you all today and to share this time together. And I'd like to give you a bit of an update as to what's been happening in the areas in which I work. So it's been a really busy start to the year, but I see that as a really positive thing because it means that people are engaging with training and all the other practices that we like people to be involved with. So I've had 3 workshops here in Victoria and quite a few more booked in coming weeks. Marianne and I also presented at Empower, which is the training that's offered to our young people in the district, our young leaders, and that was also a really worthwhile time and a great encouragement to us to see so many young people committed to being leaders in our church, and their enthusiasm and zeal for the task was just superb. And although we were the presenters, Marianne and I learned a lot that day. Something that's happened in Victoria recently in terms of legislation is that now pastors and other persons in religious ministry are mandated reporters. So that's quite a significant change for us. Of course, in our church, in the LCANZ, we know that we should be reporting whether we're mandated reporters legally or not. We've heard a lot about the child safe standards or principles nationally, but here in Victoria we also have Victorian child safe standards, and we've had those for over 3 years. So one of the things that I'm going to be focusing on this year is helping congregations to manage that and to document how they're actually meeting the standards. Next week I head off to New Zealand, and no, it's not a holiday. I'm actually going over there to deliver 2 Safe Church training workshops, and I'm also going to go around and visit every congregation in the Lutheran Church of New Zealand. So that's something I'm really looking forward to be able to work with each family over there. Finally, I want to encourage every one of you in the work that you're doing. It's really important, and don't lose sight of that, or don't lose heart. Every step, whether it's a big step or a small step, is really important in helping us to make sure that our church spaces are safe for everyone. So thank you. Well, hello everyone. It's really okay, Jennifer. You said you had some comments you wanted to make about SMO.
Just that I'd like to encourage people to use SMO. I have found it quite easy to navigate. I've found it easy to find my way around, and it's quite a useful tool to be able to keep people's records all together. So otherwise, we also have I have a spreadsheet that I keep track of people as well, because I find it easier to just look down the spreadsheet rather than having to go through each individual person's profile on SMO. So that's a helpful tool, and then I can print that off and hand it out to my other coordinators so that they know what's going on too.
Do you put programs on SMO?
Haven't at this stage. We're still learning what we need to do. I guess the thing is that we're still getting our groups to put together to adopt the process and get the applications and everything in line. So it's still very much a work in progress, but we're getting there slowly.
Well, each step is a positive thing, isn't it?
We've found it really beneficial at NIL to have bulk training sessions where we've got all the people on board, and we've asked them all to come along on one day at a certain time at a certain place, and we train all the people that we need to have trained, whether it be level 1 or level 2, and that's been really beneficial from an administration point of view, to have all the people trained at once, and then when they all come due for retraining, we can all do the training again together.
Okay, so it doesn't matter whether it's a face-to-face workshop or a webinar, you find coming together as a group is valuable?
Absolutely, yes. We've done both, and it's worked really well both times. And it's so easy to have everybody together, all doing the same thing, and then we're all on the same page and at the same stage, rather than people doing training some doing it, months apart, and then trying to keep everybody in sync. And trying to keep up with who's due for training when. It just makes it so much easier from an administration point of view. The one thing that I think is very important, I'm not so sure about the application that people are asked to fill out. I don't know whether you'll probably edit this bit out, but I think that the application for people to apply for a position to me, seems to be a bit of a waste of time. If we've got a volunteer application form and the process that we go through with a role description, I'm not sure that people should need to have to do an application form for their position as well. If we've got, like there's several forms that we're supposed to fill in for people when they start in a position, and I think that could be condensed. But I think it's important that we have the role specifications for people. If we're, especially in a small congregation where we've got a limited number of people, we'll go and tap somebody on the shoulder and say, well, how about you take on the role as whatever. Those people need to have some idea of what that role entails, and I think it's important that if we have role descriptions in place, that they've then got something that they can take away and consider what it is that we're asking them to do. And I think that's a very beneficial thing, not that people get into a role and then go, oh, I didn't realise it involved all this.
You mentioned the Royal Commission. What are your thoughts there?
The Royal Commission, I think, has brought to the fore some interesting points, some that probably don't affect everybody to some degree, but it has made us aware of the fact that we need to look after our people better, and that we need to look after all our people. The Royal Commission is probably based or focused mainly on children, but I think the fact that we've got a duty of care for all people within our organisation is one that we need to be very aware of.
Any other particular things that you had on your mind?
One other thing is that we found it quite difficult when we started the process of the professional standards development within our parish to get people to acknowledge that it was important and it needed to be done. We've had quite a few people that have decided that they don't want to stand for positions because of the training and the requirements that are put on them. However, after saying that, I have found that there's been quite a few people that have come along to the training sessions with, dragging their feet and really not wanting to be there. But after the event, I've had several people say to me, that was really good. I hadn't thought about all that stuff. And once we've been through the training once, it's a lot easier to get people to come back because they see the importance and the significance of it.
Hello everyone, I'm Elizabeth Cloden, Professional Standards Officer in Queensland. I've been in this role for just over 3 years now, a role that's changed and grown, a role with many joys and the occasional challenge too. I'm privileged and humbled to have the opportunity to work with people in various ministry areas in Queensland. Ours is not a small state, and so my role can involve considerable travel. I've seen the effects of drought, flood and fire. But most importantly, I've met so many people, and the opportunity to meet and work with people in their local setting is just so invaluable. And I really treasure this. I've visited towns and church communities, and at times I've been able to join with the congregation in worship. I'm heartened as I see people taking on the role of SP3 coordinator, perhaps at times not fully knowing where this role would lead them, but agreeing to take on the role because they want to do what they can to ensure the safety and well-being of people in their ministry context. When I'm not out and about, there are many other tasks that fill my day. At these times, contact is mainly by phone and email, and this way technology is such a great tool. It provides the link from my often mobile office to folk wherever they are. For some congregations, the need to make change and introduce new ways of working to embed a culture of safety may at times seem difficult and unnecessary, especially when the old way seems to be working well and is entrenched. For some, this is a challenge, but it is a challenge which can't be ignored. As God's children, we want to ensure our interactions with others reflects the love that God has shown each one of us. And as God's children, we want to ensure, and we are required, to meet legislative requirements. And so when the challenge may seem daunting, I encourage people not to see a mountain that seems too high to climb, but to see instead a pathway on which we journey together. A pathway that may have twists and turns and the occasional bump along the way, but a pathway that winds its way through scenes and places that bring pleasure, happiness, and most importantly, the surety of safety and well-being for all. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Shane DeJagger from the Good News Lutheran Church at Middle Park here in Brisbane. In December last year, Shane was appointed by his church council to be one of the SP3 coordinators at Middle Park. Shane's enthusiasm and dedication to his ministry role is infectious. When I asked if he'd be willing to share some of his journey and his role, he didn't hesitate but said yes, and then he said he was looking forward, and so are we. And so now, Shane, it's over to you, and thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say that it's quite a rewarding role. It's a role that is very, very helpful for a church and gives you a lot of rewards as well. So it gives you an opportunity to feel empowered to work with other volunteers, but also just to help them manage safe places and safe people. It helps to grow your own knowledge, but also the knowledge of the people that you kind of lead alongside of, just because it creates structures in place for people to follow and people to understand how to work as a team or to work in environments with other people. So it's very rewarding in that aspect.
Why is it important to have a structure in place for people?
I think when you work with people, automatically there seems to be a sense of trying to navigate who's the leader, who's the person who has kind of got authority in this space to make decisions, but also someone who's going to be, I guess, a person to go to if something doesn't work out or if something negative happens. People always turn towards someone to kind of help them get over the issue that occurred or help them to manage whatever they're dealing with. And having an appointed person who's ready and trained to deal with things that happen in church environments, but also in life, just helps people to feel safe, help people to feel like they're okay and that people can cope with whatever's going on around them.
What are some of the challenges you faced?
Some of the challenges for me would have to be is coming from a volunteer perspective of the people I'm sort of leading youth with and working with kids with. So I'm employed at my church as the Youth and Young Adults Director, and so it's very good for me to undergo this training because it's to do with my job, it's to do with who I work with, and the things that I do. But from a volunteer perspective, it's not as easy for people to be accepting and open to the training, to undergoing training or undergoing new policies or new practices to help keep children safe. And some of the challenges have been just the pushback of people not understanding why they need to do this training or why it's worthwhile. And just I think with the culture that's been instilled with our volunteers was that we do have a safe place, but we did our own training for that, about how to not be in a room one-on-one with children or things like that. So we did our own training. So I guess from their perspective, they were wondering, well, why do we need to do this additional training for things that we already know? And so some of the things that we did just to help us kind of come over that was we just changed the culture and the language behind sort of needing to do this training or that it's a standard that's been introduced to kind of now this is what we say we value. And if we really value safe places and safe children, well, then we do this additional training because it becomes a part of our values and a part of our culture. And so that's been a bit of an issue for us to navigate, but our volunteers feel like it's something that they're a part of now, and that they can do as a part of where they lead or how they work with young people.
Okay. Have you been supported by other leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. So the other coordinator in my church setting has been very, very helpful. She's someone who's been employed by the church for the past 15 years. And so she's seen a lot of workplace health and safety issues and potential risks that have popped up all over the place. And so she's been really, really my go-to person to kind of say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this program or this activity. What are some of the things you think are potential dangers or potential risks that you could see in this? So she's been very helpful to just kind of say, well, this could possibly happen. This could be a bad issue. This is how you can manage it and things like that. So bouncing ideas backwards and forwards with another employee is really helpful. And church council as well, going to the meetings and saying, these are some of the issues I've come across. What do you think would be helpful in this role? What are some potential issues you might see or things like that? So that's been helpful too.
Yep. Here's a question a bit out of the blue. What do you think we could improve in the way we're doing things?
It's an interesting question. I think it's not so much more sort of what LCA could improve or you guys could improve. I think it's a matter of just churches coming together and recognizing that this is something we need to all stand upon. It's not something that, kind of one church does to try and, keep people safe, another church does something else. But maybe just churches coming together and leaning on each other's strengths and weaknesses and saying how we can help each other out with our processes and our policies and things like that. So maybe just connecting relationally churches to churches and being kind of like that third party to say, you're going through the same phase of training at the moment. Why don't you talk to each other and see how you can help each other out or something like that. So connecting us maybe.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Anything else that's come to mind that you'd like to share with other coordinators?
I think one of the things that I've learned is that your work's never really done. Is that it's something that you constantly work with. It's not something everyone particularly wants to hear. But you work towards safety and you work towards implanting structures and frameworks. And then you kind of, you ride the wave of seeing how that unfolds and you kind of make small adjustments as you go. So an analogy I like to think of it in my head is like when you're preparing all the new training and you're learning everything and you're implementing new things, it's kind of like a plane that's going to be taking off. It's got all its safety checks that need to happen. It's got its pilots and it's got its people that it's trying to carry with them. But as it sort of flies in the air, well, the pilot doesn't just look away and pretend he's not flying anymore. He actually makes small little adjustments as they're flying through, just making sure that people are safe, they're on the course that they want to be, checking any cargo or anything like that. And then sort of when it comes to the landing phase, they make sure that everyone's on board, everyone knows where they're coming from, and they land safely. And that kind of process happens day in, day out. And coordinators' role is just to keep an eye out for those little things along the way to look out for.
Some of your colleagues. There certainly are some challenges you guys are facing, but there's also some great confirmation of the value of the work you're all doing. And there are also some great ideas. Thank you for sharing those with us. I'm sure all of you will have identified with a lot of what has been said. I also spoke to a number of our SANT coordinators in the last couple of weeks. One, in a rural congregation, noted some quite extreme resistance to engaging in safe church training. And there was some resistance to even the need for background screening. Please know that we appreciate the difficulties you face. So some of the things we've heard in these discussions are, there's lots of paperwork. This emphasises the need to support each other, and this is both at congregational level and right across our church. One of the considerations here are the different roles within keeping people safe. Now, so far, the model adopted by many has been to expect SP3 coordinators like yourselves to take on all of these. Some of the specific roles I'm referring to here are granting permission to proceed, monitoring compliance, and that's been both background screening and in training, work health and safety, or maybe it's in administrative support. In smaller congregations, at least one of the coordinators referred to there, all of those things may be undertaken by 1 or 2 people. Although we strongly encourage congregations, even in small congregations, to have someone who is acting as both a primary coordinator and an alternate coordinator. Of course, in larger congregations, or even across parishes, each of these roles may be addressed by multiple people. Chair people, vice chairs, paid youth workers, admin managers, office workers and the like may all be directly involved. Here are a few questions to consider. How would you identify the roles in your congregation, in your ministry group? What are the different responsibilities that need to be addressed? And how can that workload be shared better? What should we be doing differently? And importantly, what support do you need? Now, many of you are facing the objections of members in relation to training and compliance. Now, some say, well, why do I have to do this training? Or they say, I'm not going to do this training. We've had people grumble to their SP3 coordinator, then give district office a call, and then talk to their professional standards officer, all with the view to trying to gain exemption. And sadly, some of these are senior office holders in our ministry groups. We have situations where members don't want to volunteer because of the amount of compliance and or training. Some say it's just all too hard. We say sharing God's love, living our faith and making where love comes to life a reality does take effort. Sometimes lots of effort, and we recognise that. Once again, please remember, you're not alone. Now, more than ever, we need to collectively think about how we can support each other better. The coronavirus is forcing us to rethink how we're doing some of even the most basic things that we've come to take for granted in life. It's limiting our freedom. It's taking a lot of effort from each and every one of us. It's forcing us to do things differently. As a result of the horrendous happenings revealed by the Royal Commissions, governments have increased their requirements of us. We as a church have in the past failed to adequately protect people. We failed to truly demonstrate God's love. As a consequence, we need to do things differently. This group of people we have participating in this webinar here today are an important catalyst for implementing real change. What do we need to change to help each other better? That's all from Reporter Dave. Over to Tim.
Thank you, Dave, and thanks to everyone who contributed there. And I might just mention that in relation to Denise Muschamp, that message was recorded before she went to New Zealand. I'm pleased to report she is back safely home from New Zealand. Now time for us to try to answer your questions. Some people have sent in questions upon registration, so we might try to deal with those firstly. So Helen Semler from South Australia said that she has had some difficulty with safety management online and with updating the training status for volunteers. So PSD does amend the training details on SMO. We do that for you. The exception is the level 2 modules, which are done through SMO. Anne Sivior, I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, so apologies if it's incorrect, from South Australia. Do you have a list of templates that we can use and adapt? Absolutely. If you go onto SMO, under resources, there are plenty of templates there, and also on the LCA portal, some of them are on there too. can we do an annual check or report at the beginning of each year to cover things like Sunday school, youth group and similar gatherings, rather than having to prepare something for each weekly event? Certainly, please don't reinvent the wheel. There's no need for that, but also please don't just set and forget. So have your templates there, and it should become easier, and review when things change, and just review regularly to make sure your plans, your risk assessments, management that you have in place are still suitable for your activities. Colleen Hagi from South Australia said, is there anywhere in SMO where you can just record incidents that have happened and the steps to ensure they don't happen again? Yes, you can click on a specific tab which says incidents, and please, if anyone is having trouble with this, with SMO, you can contact your professional standards officer, and they will talk you through it while you're in front of your screen. SMO has been a really good system for us. The church is looking to invest more in LAMP2 and HRS, so I do just need to inform you of that. But for the time being, we are using SMO, and it does work very well. It's a good tool for us. Noel Meebus in Victoria has also written in about SMO and says that he doesn't find it particularly easy to use, and he can't keep track online of those trains. So again, yes, Noel, please do call your PSO when you have a chance to, and when you're in front of your screen, and your PSO can guide you through that, hopefully, and be of assistance. Sorry to sound like a broken record, but those PSOs are really invaluable resources for you, and we'd like you to have a great relationship with them and bounce things off them. And as I said, if they're not available, you can call the office here, and hopefully I'll be around, or someone else can help you. So the first four of those questions did pertain to came from the South Australia Northern Territory District. The final one was from the Victorian District, but was on SMO. And Dave Byer is quite an expert, I'd say, on SMO. So perhaps, Dave, did you want to add anything to what I mentioned there in response to those questions?
No, sorry.
Okay.
I think, Dave, what you've said is fine.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dave. So Lynette Hire from Tasmania is a coordinator allowed to provide a reference for a volunteer when the volunteer's being appointed. So that's a team member, whether voluntary or paid. So that was the first part of Lynette's question. I might just jump to the second part of her question. Is there a simplified outline of the whole SP3 process, starting from scratch as it applies in a parish, 3 congregations? I really think the best overview is in the session 2 of our level 1 training. That provides a very high level, simple explanation, and then you can build on that. We build on that and explaining it to you during our level 2 webinar. Again, if you're still confused, please call your PSO and have a chat about it, and they may be able to send you something else in writing which might help. So that was the second part of the next question. So the first part in relation to a reference, I think that goes to something that Marianne was talking about, and the familiarity that we have with other folks in congregations and ministries, and how we do really need to go through a thorough screening process, even when we feel that we do know someone quite well. Marianne, would you like to speak to that a little bit more?
I certainly would. Thank you, Tim. I also would like to refer to Jennifer's points also around that sometimes she gets queries about why it's important to, why do we need to go through a process of being quite formal when volunteers who we know quite well are making applications to undertake roles within the church. I again go back to emphasise that this is an area that the Royal Commission identified as a great area of weakness for us and a great area of risk. And I said to you that familiarity and knowing people is really good in a church, and it's very important in terms of establishing trust, creating trust, relying on that trust, having confidence in people, creating friendships and having a sense of belonging. All of that stuff is really important. There's also a real familial context as well, that often a lot of the people in our church and in our leadership roles are often related to each other. And that's great. It's really important, but it's also one of our greatest weaknesses, as I said to you. So when you are asked questions about, well, why do we have to keep doing these formal application processes or these formal screenings or these formal selection processes for people in roles, it's because of that issue. For those of you who understand grooming and who understand the nature of grooming and the dangers associated with grooming, when somebody comes into your congregation for purposes of getting good contact with children, because we know that churches are soft targets, they don't just groom the children. And they don't just groom the parents, they groom you. And sometimes groomers, as we know, in terms of understanding paedophilia and understanding child sexual abuse, can be very, very patient. So that's why it's important, is that you do a careful assessment process in relation to screening, and that you're as objective as you can be, and that you maintain an awareness of the dangers of familiarity and having dual relationships. So even though you might have people saying, oh, you know, say if it was me, Marianne, why do we have to do this? This is ridiculous. You've known me for 5 years now. You need to come up with good answers to those sorts of queries and say, it's really important we do this properly. This is all about the safety of children. One of the things I was going to raise actually in relation to some of the other questions that have been asked of me was something in relation to what Shane said from Good News in Middle Park. Shane said something I thought was utterly wonderful when he talked about the importance of walking the talk. Is that the right expression? Yes, walking the talk. So he talked about it's really important that when people say, I don't understand why we have to do this training or why we have to have this screening or why we have to have a formal process for volunteer applications, he talked about changing the culture and changing the language. And you know, when I was talking to you before about taking a leadership role in child safety, that's exactly, Shane has operationalised those words for me and for us by saying, change your language. Talk to people about how we value it or how I value it and how I value how important it is to have an objective assessment of you in this particular role. That's walking the talk, and that's demonstrating leadership, and it's what we want people to do in terms of demonstrating an understanding around the importance of this stuff. You need to know that we walk a fine line. We're walking on a ridge around familiarity. Sometimes it's fantastic, other times it can be really dangerous. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. And another question for you, this time from Russell Marley in South Australia. It has taken Russell 12 months to get all his background checks for his people in line. The Lions Club, as well as other community groups, do not have to comply with strict regulations like we have to. This is Russell speaking. Even though many of them associate with children. For example, exchange students. Some other denominations are shaking their heads when they are told what we have to do. They do not have any such requirements. Why? As for the football club, where there is weekly and more contact by adults with children, what are their requirements?
Oh, fantastic questions from Russell. Thank you, Tim. To try and answer that question, I could say to you that it's really important you don't compare yourself to the organisation down the road. And it's really important you don't listen to what people say about they don't have to jump through hoops like we do. It's really important, as Shane was saying, walk the talk, change your language, honour issues around child safety and safety of other vulnerable people, and come back at people with who ask those sorts of questions and say it's really important for us to be as child safe as we possibly can. The other thing I think it's really important to understand is that I think it's unlikely that the local football club is behaving in that way, and if they are, they're not meeting required standards or even required legislation. The same would go for any other organisation that's saying we don't have to do this. The reality is, and I think it's important to get this message across, is that things have changed. Churches are becoming regulated environments. That's really different. Becoming regulated environments. Governments want to know how well we're doing this. Things are changing. It means that there's going to be more compliance requirements for churches. So I don't think we can no longer rest by thinking to ourselves the paperwork will decrease or the requirements will become less onerous. They're not going to. That's our reality. So we do need to rise up and face it and deal with it. Now, some of the people today have said some really good things, like Dave said, this takes effort, and yes it does, and quite a few of the PSOs who've talked today and quite a few of the coordinators who we've heard from today have said similar things. It is really important that we understand these requirements are necessary, but what I want you to do out there is not to view them as compliance and as something negative, and not to respond defensively when people ask you those sorts of questions. What you need to do is rise up and view it as something positive and say, this is the best way that we can keep children safe in this church. And if we've got children who are happy and children who feel safe, that's a great thing for our church. And it's also the way our church will grow. And it's also the way our church will have a fantastic future. So it's all those sorts of things that we need to be saying. As Shane says, we've got to walk the talk. I don't even know how I actually use those words, but as Shane said, we've got to change the culture and change our language. So I wouldn't go comparing ourselves to anyone else down the road. It's not helpful at all.
Thank you for that. And Carl Schenscher in South Australia wanted us to look at, and you've already touched on it, the viability of our activities, programming ongoing public worship, and it's particularly topical now. We know that, but perhaps if we could set aside the virus for a minute, we know that we're going to be more regulated, and not to be alarmist. In an extreme scenario, a government might say that we can't conduct worship because we're not child safe. What would you say about that, Marianne, the viability of the church and worship and its activities?
Look, I get asked this question a lot in terms of if we become too regulated and we focus too much on rules and regulations and requirements, then people won't want to run programs for children, or they won't want to have youth groups, or they won't want to have Sunday school. People won't volunteer anymore, etc., etc. I think, again, my best message to you is to rise above that, turn it on its head, turn it into something positive. Talk about things like, if children feel safe and have a sense of belonging here, they'll come back. If children have friends here and people that they feel safe with, if they feel valued and respected, and if they feel that people listen to them and they're not just being viewed as these small objects attached to their parents, they'll come back, and they'll help your church to grow, and they'll help your church to be a happy, vibrant, fulfilling, safe place for children and families and for everybody. So I think it's a very dangerous or slippery surface to wander down to think that this could work against us as a church. And in fact, what it can do is actually help us as a church to be even better than we are. So I think, and that again, Tim can't do that, I can't do that, our PSOs can't do it from district offices. It's actually people out in the congregations that have to make those changes. We need you to be delivering those messages and to be countering that sort of negativity. I utterly get it that the requirements are onerous and it's really hard for volunteers, and that's why I take my hat off to coordinators and to anybody who's volunteering in a church. It's fantastic what you do. And I get it that it's hard, but the reality is it's not going to lessen in terms of the requirements. So we've got to turn them into something positive. I guess that's the best way I can answer that.
Thank you, Marianne. We might hear a little from Emma Grates because we've got a couple of questions on the training. So Emma, Trish Heinrich of Victoria says, why can't we do a train the trainer type model for Safe Church training? What's your response to that?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Trish. And I've been looking at even some of the other comments that have been coming through even today, and I think we'll have a chance to answer most of those fairly soon. There's multiple reasons why we haven't investigated train the trainer at this point in time. It's not off the table. It's just not going to be one of our major priorities right at this point in time. Some of the things behind that is because it's an ever-changing area when it comes to training, and so we're working all the time really closely with our PSOs to ensure that they have the most up-to-date information. So we're not dismissing the idea. Please know we've got that on the table to discuss, and we would love to be able to offer something like that maybe in the future, but it's not part of our current training program as it stands.
Thanks, Emma. And Ian McMahon in Victoria, he was interested in the progress with online training and recognition of prior learning, and I think you covered that in your presentation. The Constitution, he refers to a Constitution, assuming that that's his local Constitution. Church councils may need new members for specific needs, and these people would need to be screened and trained pretty quickly, which could create difficulties enabling them to be trained up in a timely manner. What would you say about people being trained up in Safe Church training in a timely manner?
Right now, timely manner is online training, probably. There was a few questions asking when will the training be available, and I'm sorry if I skipped over that really briefly. Our aim will be to have it up and running by the start of April. That's the full day training or the full level 1 training. So for some of those who may need to be doing that fairly quickly, there is options. There was some, and I'm probably going to just jump around with some of the questions if that's okay with you, Tim. There was some people who said limitations with internet and what does that mean, or even don't even have internet or email access. We recognise that, and right now when we're in an environment where gathering together is looking less and less likely for at least the next couple of months, we will be working really closely with the PSD, the Professional Standards Department, to ensure that those who might feel like their training is expiring or that they're worried that they might not be meeting any of their fulfillments, that we'll be talking to those groups to ensure that they feel that they are adequately supported. For some groups it just might mean that we'll have to wait until a little bit further down the track to do that face-to-face again. So in terms of making sure that people are trained in a timely manner, there is now a really great option with online training, and there are ways to be able to do that as a group as well. Individually online you'll have to do your activities, but you might like to actually do that as a group. Again, as we roll it out, we'll be talking a lot with the professional standards officers about how they can support you. My encouragement right now is please don't email your professional standards officer today asking about online training, because they are still getting briefed on how that's going to look over the next few weeks. Please give them at least until sort of the start of April when we are able to roll it out and to support everybody who is involved. There was another question that talked about online support. Will individuals be supported if they're doing online training? The answer is absolutely yes. At Australian Lutheran College we have dedicated teams who work in the online space and are able to support. So anyone who enrolls or registers will be given all of that information. We will also be supporting the professional standards officers to ensure that they know how they can support as well. They'll be getting their own tutorials on how to access iLearn, how to be able to see different people where they're at in the system. So please know we're not just going to throw people into an environment, an online environment where they have no idea what they're doing. We really want to be able to still continue that partnership just like we would in a face-to-face training, where when we're sitting around a table or in a group, we're able to ask questions and bounce off of each other. We still want to be able to provide some kind of environment in that. So hopefully in that sort of, it lets you know a little bit more about what you're looking for. If you're not sure if I've answered that properly, please talk to your professional standards officer to just ask more of those questions about what is a timely manner and how can we get them trained up as quickly as possible. Thanks, Tim.
And how much will it cost?
Yeah. Sorry, cameraman, thanks for coming back to me. Maybe I'll just make sure I've covered all those questions before I hand back to Tim. So another question that was asked of Trish. Trish, you asked this question, how much is online training? It is the same cost as what it would be if you do the face-to-face workshop. So each of those sessions will still be $10 each. The refresher is probably the one I'm not going to say on camera with certainty, just because that's getting finalised this week. But the refresher course won't be as much as a full day training as well. So that's another one to tick off. Margie talked about automatic registration. She wanted to know that whether you'll get automatic information sent to you or whether you have to do it again. I'm assuming, Margie, you're talking about if you registered for a workshop that has now been cancelled or suspended, will you get notification of online? Please allow your district office or the administrators to work with that and to get in contact with you. A lot of us in this last week, and you probably can all understand that we've been playing around that space of phone call after phone call of cancellations and suspensions and people asking those kind of questions. Allow us another week to be able to get through that backlog, to be able to get in contact with congregations who may have thought they've got people going to a workshop, now they're not. Can they transfer to online? All of those questions will be answered, and my hope is that the answer is yes. We'll be able to support people to do online if they need. Margie, you also asked a really quick question about RPL as well. That will be one that I'll say you'll need to talk to your PSO. Everybody has different levels of recognition of prior learning, which may mean that if they only have to do S2, they won't be doing a refresher for just S2. They'll probably just go in for an hour and do another S2 session. Again, PSOs will be briefed on that in the next couple of weeks as we transition into online learning, and also the development and release of the refresher. So again, please just give us about a week or so to get all that tidied up, and then we'll be able to share that information with you through your PSOs. Mackay, I think I've now answered your question, which is when is this all available? Start of April. We'd love to say the 1st of April just because it sounds like an April Fool's joke, but no. 1st of April is what we'd love to aim for, but definitely by Easter. So that first week in April, you'll hear more. We'll make sure it's announced officially. Somebody asked, Carol, you asked about congregational leaders like your church councils, ministry teams, if there's a way that they can get some online learning to know how they can support, especially the SP3 system, but you as coordinators. Great idea. Thank you for flagging that. We'll be putting that onto the table of discussions on whether we can do a short webinar or a tutorial that we can get up online that you'll be able to share with them as well. Please understand we've got a little bit of a big project right now with getting the online system up and running, but we're not going to put that to the side at all. So, last quick question I noticed, Bronnie, you asked the question about can you do your refresher before your level 1 training is complete? This is probably a stock standard answer is you can do your next updated training before your current one expires. Just know that whatever the next training you do, whether you redo a full day training or the level 1 full training, or if you go on to do the refresher, it will be dated from that. So if you do it only a year ago, you did the full training and you go and do the refresher, then in 3 years' time, you'll have to do the refresher again. Whereas if you waited closer to the end of your 3 years for your full training, then your refresher is then for 3 years. Again, any of you who've got questions in that area, that's what your PSO is there to support you with. So I think very quickly, Tim, that's all of those questions are revolving around training. If you've got more, put them through, and if we have time, I'll see if I can answer them. So thanks, Tim.
Excellent. Thanks, Emma. So Sharon Reid in Perth has asked about notifications from SMO of expiries of working with children checks. And yes, we can organise that. We don't have that for for everyone those notifications switched on at the moment, because in some cases a flood of emails can be automatically generated, and people can get a little bit grumpy from time to time. But yeah, definitely we can organise that for you, Sharon, and we'll be in touch in relation to that.
And if I can just add a quick comment, that's an opt-in for congregations. All right, so have a discussion with Bill. If Bill needs support, give us a call, and we can actually follow through there. And if I can tag on the end of that, I apologise. Earlier on, my head was in another space, and I should have actually followed on from Tim's comments on some SMO matters. Can I address those now?
Yes, for sure.
Okay, so automatic notification is certainly one thing, and we can do that separately for appointment status, so that's your background screening checks, etc., and also for training. So have a chat to us. Noel Mebus, you've got a number of different questions you've raised at various different stages with SMO. Probably the best thing I can do, and this applies for other coordinators as well, if you're really struggling with safety management online, give us a call. Holly or myself are very familiar with the system, and perhaps we can make some suggestions. But Noel, in your situation, what I'd like to do is perhaps have a chat directly with Denise, your professional standards officer, and let's set up a three-way call and discuss exactly how we can use the system better. That's a broader topic. The way we've used SMO in each of the different congregations, or across the church more precisely, possibly needs to change. Let's have a look at the way you work and the support you need. What I intend to do after today is to take some of this SMO specific questions, put them into a document, because we got some actually really good feedback from those who are quite familiar with the system. And it'd be good for you to actually be able to see what some of the other congregations have been able to achieve. And thanks, Anna Crone, for your comments there. I'll include your comments, Anna, in another document. I can understand that looking at SMO, trying to work out what training's done and are people compliant might be a little bit confusing. Partly due to the changes that have evolved over the last 3 years, and now it looks even a little bit different. Allow us to help you in understanding that. There are things that we can do fairly quickly to clarify things for you there. There is one question: can we record incidents on SMO? Yes, you sure can. SMO has its own full, very comprehensive way of being able to record incidents, and we need to make better use of that. But even if you're not using the full SMO forms, either electronic or hard copy, you can upload your own documents there so that there is a record of incidents. And that same principle applies to programs and a range of different other things. So it leads me on to resources in SMO. We've recently uploaded a whole heap of new resources, LCA specific resources that can help you, things like role descriptions. So we're trying to work very much more closely with Church Workers Support Department so that we're not just looking at our needs, but looking at the broader needs of the church. One of the new features that was added to SMO last year was training history. So we can look back at a person's whole complete training history. So in this document that I'm going to send out, we'll explain a few more of those things. But I encourage you, if SMO's not doing what you need it to do, let us know. Have a chat to us, and let's see if we can use it in a different way that does suit your particular requirements. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks for that, Dave. So we had a few more questions for Marianne. Some people were very keen to have a copy of the slides from your presentation. Also, what is a self-assessment tool? A question from Glenda Heinrich at Light Congregation. So what or where is this self-assessment tool?
Excellent, thanks Tim. Okay, in terms of the slides, a couple of people have asked this. Yes, absolutely, and of course, the slides will be made available to you and we can send them out post-haste. In terms of the self-assessment tool, I think I was worried about that I was going over time. I may not have been as clear in relation to that. What we've done is we've rewritten the national principles into LCA speak, congregational speak, basically, and we're calling them the LCA NZ Child Safety Standards for Congregations, and they're coming out for consultation to you very soon. So, as I said before, we're encouraging you to comment as much as you can and to offer us some help in terms of how useful you think they'll be in helping you and other members of your leadership teams create a child-safe culture around your congregations. We will accompany the LCA Child-Safe Standards for Congregations with some really good, straightforward, simple guidelines. We don't want them to be complex, we don't want it to be wordy, we don't want it to be in sort of official, formal, bureaucratic speak. I know the Catholics have developed their own standards and calling them the Catholic Child Safe Standards, I think. But they've written an implementation manual that's 90 pages long. It's great, it's full of fantastic information, but we don't want to do that for you. We want to write something that is going to be really straightforward and really user-friendly and succinct. We also will need at some point to measure how well are we implementing these standards that reflect the national principles in each of our congregations, particularly in those states that are already regulating, i.e. Victoria, and the other two states, ACT and New South Wales, who have indicated that they're going to go ahead with regulation. We're going to have some way of measuring it. Hence, we will be developing a self-assessment tool. So the self-assessment tool isn't yet ready for you. It's being drafted as we speak. Once the standards are approved, if the LCA makes a decision to go ahead with them, we will develop some sort of tool for you that's really simple, that will help you report back to your districts about how well you're meeting the standards. We don't want it to be another compliance exercise. We want it to be something positive that's going to help to create change. There was a third question for me, Tim, which was from Anna Crone at the Waikerie Parish, which was, will you be specifically consulting children as per the 10 principles? Now, Anna, I can tell you I'm so excited to get this question. Thank you. I have been working in this area for a very long time now. Very few people ask me that question. Most organisations, most people skip that part, forget about it. Yes is the answer. We will be consulting with children and young people. I am keen to talk to as many children and young people in different age groups about what does being safe at church mean to you? What does it look like? How does it feel? How can we make church feel safer for you? What ideas have you got? What would you like to see different happening in your congregation around being safe? A lot of stuff we want to talk to children about friendships and a sense of belonging and how included they feel and how respected they feel and how involved they feel. So Anna, thank you for that question. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to highlight it, and thank you for thinking of children and young people in terms of the consultation process. There were a couple of other questions that I had in this list. Tim, shall I just address those as we go? One was it's a comment from Lionel Rawlack from the Pittsworth Parish. Thank you also, Lionel. Lionel's comment was, when I was talking about what would Jesus think about the Royal Commission, And what would he say? I said, I'm sure he would be saddened. Lionel's comment was, he's with us, and he is saddened. And thank you, Lionel, he is, I'm sure, horrified and very disappointed, and is very, very keen for us to be doing the work that we're doing. Bronnie Borgas from Unley said, don't apologise about showing the photos. It shows clearly why we are doing what we're doing. Thank you, Bronnie. It does, doesn't it? I think it's very important that we face the realities, as hard as it is. And Anne Sivior said something similar. Photos actually make it unfortunately real, and it does. Also, Anne Sivior from the Cleve Parish said, please don't apologise for going over things again this year. Some of us, like me, were not in this position last year. It is new to us. Thank you, Anne. I was aware of that, and I was a bit worried because I didn't want to go over too much stuff that was talked about last year, but I also really wanted anyone who was new for this to stand up on its own. What I would say is that the video of the talk I gave last year is up on the PSD webpage on our website. It's still up there, isn't it, Tim? Yeah, so have a look at that, where we sort of talked a bit more about the vulnerability of children and what it means to be a child, etc. So thank you for that, Anne. Now, there are two other things I just wanted to address. There was a couple of comments about when I talked about repentance and forgiveness. And I just wanted to clarify. Again, I had a sense of worrying that I was needing to go fast because I wanted to get so much in. I want to emphasise the importance of forgiveness in our church and how important the concept of forgiveness of sin and absolution is, and the importance of receiving God's grace. I get all of that, and I know it's an absolute priority for us as Lutherans and in the Lutheran Church. I know that it's really, really important. What I was trying to say, and thank you David Jarman from Tamworth who tried to elaborate on what I was trying to say. I'm not saying forgiveness of sin and confession and repentance is a bad thing. I think it's a fantastically important thing in our church. However, what I was trying to also say is that sometimes, and from the Royal Commission's findings, sometimes it can actually have the opposite effect because it gives people that sense of absolution. I've got God's forgiveness, I've got God's grace, and I'm now a free person. The issue is around, for us, in terms of emphasising, is that forgiveness must not be unconditional. Forgiveness and absolution must come with some responsibility and some change. And emphasising that most definitely forgiveness that is unconditional and forgiveness that requires no responsibility or no actions can be very dangerous in child sexual abuse in the church. The other issue that was brought up for me, just one last thing, was from will we be consulting with children? Yes. Karen Tromans from Unley said, will we be regulating against the principles? Does that mean we'll be regulating using the principles or regulating opposing the principles? We definitely don't oppose the principles, Karen. We're absolutely will be regulating against the principles is a term of expression of saying we will be regulating our progress in relation to the principles, which will be hopefully the LCA standards. Now there was one more for me, which was about... there was just one more thing that I wanted to add. That with the standards that we have drafted, the LCA child safe standards for congregations, we're also very, very keen to trial them in a number of congregations. And a few congregations are quite keen, and I've got a few congregations in mind who I'm keen to talk to who also might be quite keen. SANT district has said yes and indicated a keenness to trial their implementation. I've also got a few other congregations, and some of you who might be out there listening who I've talked to will probably know that who I mean, who might also be interested. So, and that will really help us get a sense of whether or not we're hitting the mark or not. So I just wanted to emphasise that. And I think the one final thing that I did want to say was what Tim said, and I think Emma also emphasised about the training, is remember the training is foundational only. It's only giving people the very rudimentary basics, the information that's necessary from a child safety and vulnerable person's perspective. What we want people to do is come away from that training enthused and curious, so that they come away from that training thinking they want to explore it more, and more importantly, put it into practice. And when I talked about you as leaders in child safety within your congregations, that's part of your role, helping people put their learning into practice. Keep bringing it up, keep talking about it, keep talking about the things that were in the training with every opportunity you have. Otherwise, people will just park it somewhere and it won't be something useful until they come to look at it 3 years later. So thank you. I think they were all my questions.
Thanks, Marianne. We do have plenty more questions, but unfortunately not much more time, and we do want to let you go on time. So we will respond during this coming week to the questions that have been sent in. We do apologise to the people who have sent questions that we haven't answered yet, but we will be in touch for sure. Just before we finish, I do want to thank several people. And I apologise in advance if I miss anyone, but thank you to our speakers today, to Marianne, to Emma, to all of our wonderful professional standards officers, to our technical support, John and Sean Heppel. Special mention to Professional Standards Officer Dave Bye, who's also great with the technical side of things. And our administration staff, Holly Koning and Kathy Sharkey. Thank you so much. To all the coordinators who contributed, particularly Deirdre, Sharon, and Shane, and Jennifer and Christine. And thank you to all of you out there for joining us today, giving up your time in this way. So we'll close with a very, very brief prayer. Father God, thank you so much that we can come together, that we've been able to spend this time online together. Thank you for this church's great group of enthusiastic coordinators and other leaders. We pray that everyone goes away and is safe tonight. We pray for the ongoing protection of the vulnerable in your midst. Give us great strength and courage in our work. In Jesus Christ we pray. Amen. So I'm told that we have had around 65 participants on this network day, so that's great. Thank you so much again. I want to affirm what you're doing. Special shout out to people who do this on a voluntary basis. So please keep up the good work. Thank you. Stay safe and God bless. Goodbye.